Welcome back everybody to part 3 of how I built a giant miniature bat cave. Please hit the subscribe button and please batarang that like button all the way back to the Fortress of Solitude where it belongs. Let's get into the next part of all of the detail that goes into the rock formations. A lot of diorama guys and modernized sculpture people using foam materials know what that white texture is. You can see it in the background of the picture. It is in fact drywall putty or spackling paste. If you end up using the method that I'm about to describe, please tag me, like me, or @mention me. I would love to see how you use it. I want to see what other people do with all these techniques I go over, because I know you guys are going to take the ideas that I've had and make them even better. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what you guys do with this stuff. Here we have my finished entrance to the bat cave placed in the corner where it's going to go. And I realized at this point I had a lot of work ahead of me to do this big rock formation above it, because I wanted it to be a bit of an overhang to help accentuate that cathedral and that sort of buttress shape. Yes, buttress, that's a real word, to look like it was holding up the ceiling of the diorama. And so in doing this, having a lot of convex shapes and a lot of concave shapes, that's going out and going in, if you remember your geometry, was going to be hard to do, especially with my small hot wire foam cutter. To get those convex shapes incorporated with the concave shapes, the stuff especially going inward, was going to be difficult to do. So I realized I had to break it up into chunks. And you see the same method I already discussed here being implied in a much larger scale, where I had to incorporate the foam fanning outward from a central point. This section of the diorama goes into a 90-degree corner, and what I did was I took 1-inch sheets of foam. They were cut in a triangular shape, so they would fit into the corner perfectly perpendicular and parallel to all the other straight sides. Then I fanned them out around the space they needed to be in so that they could be brought in and out of that corner. But if you look closely, that is actually 3 different pieces of that fan. I glued it into chunks of 3 so that I could pull them out one at a time, cut them and add them, and draw and sketch in where the details of the rock formations needed to align. I used the sewing needle pins to hold the rock up onto the wall without gluing it, because I needed to be able to remove it, adjust it, sand it, shape it, cut it, and put it back up to make sure everything fit properly before final gluing and texture. So using these sewing needles helped me to be able to do that. A very long and arduous process. You can see on the walls to the left and right of that large upper rock formation, I took cut-offs from my other rock formations that had one flat side, and I would take things that already had a shape to them and I would create flows of movement, either vertically, horizontally, with a curve, and I would trim off using my hot wire cutter very organic shapes, and I would glue them on following the shape of what I thought made sense for either a natural rock formation, or somebody had come in with maybe mining equipment and cut away at the rock later. I laid in those chunks of rock on top to get the convex shapes coming off of my flat walls. The concave aspect was I went in with my Dremel around all of those convex shapes, and I dug in with my Dremel to have the where you had the negative and the positive coming out from the flat edge of the diorama, so that you could get the in and up and the undulating flow of the rock, and it wasn't just flat and sticking out. In this close-up, you can see how I fanned out the material. Straight on, you can see the vertical lines between the glued pieces of foam, but as you get away from it, they turn, right? And so there's a middle chunk and 2 side chunks, and I would pull them out, cut them, and put them back in. At this point, while I was gluing together all the rock, I decided it would be good to make a couple of man doors, because these man doors were going to be incorporated into the rock walls I was currently working on. Most exterior or large doors here in America, the ANSI, or the ANSI, the American National Standards Institute, has exterior doors at about 3 feet wide and about 6 foot 8 inches tall. When you scale that down to action figure size in 1/12 scale, you get 3 inches wide by 7 inches tall. It's about the right size for a normal exterior ANSI standard door, which looks right to the eye when you get there. So this door is made 3 by 7, and it's made out of expanded foam board or PVC sheet, poster board, and styrene. And of course you can see those metal details. Those are some little bits and bobs I have laying around. I have tons of boxes of found materials that I can incorporate into dioramas. Those are some little tiny nuts, some wire, and some locking mechanisms for steel tubing. You can see my rough traces here and why I needed to figure these doors out to make sure that they got placed properly into the rock. I took this picture of myself with that main rock formation like I had overcome a huge obstacle at this point, because I had successfully glued them together, filled them in with drywall putty. All of those seams and edges got filled in with spackling paste. Glob a big piece off, wipe it into the diorama, and then go back with a wet paintbrush and just brush it down and into place where you want it. That's the simplest way to do it. It's not complex, it just takes time. The way that I went about doing this texture was I took a chip brush, which is these cheap little brushes. This was a 2-inch one, which is what I used for this diorama. You can get these at Home Depot, Harbor Freight. They're usually around $1, sometimes less than $1. And I got it really, really wet in some water. And then I would take the spackling paste and I would push it really hard into the spackling paste, almost like I was getting a very thick amount of paint onto this brush, but instead I would do it with spackling paste. And then what you do is you go over your foam, tapping really, really hard. And I would do this over the entire piece of foam, sometimes twice, depending on how much texture I wanted. And in doing so, you not only spread out the spackling paste evenly across the foam, but as the bristles of the wet brush push down and lift up off of that texture, it creates little edges and ripples and details. And when it dries, it levels out a little bit and you get this beautiful rock texture. Once it's painted, it comes out really, really nice. Here you can see this entire side of the diorama after I had textured it and painted all of the main rock formations and pieces how I wanted them to be. Turned out really, really, really well, much better than I was even intending to. That's always nice when you get to that point. Here is a close-up after I had gone back in and added some different layers of colors. I wanted to add some lighting with the way that I painted onto the rock so that it would give some effects without just being like one solid color of brownish gray. I actually ended up using 5 different colors of paint to paint this rock. Most caves and different natural formations are not just going to be one solid color. They're going to be layers of grime and grit. And I imagine in this cave, because it was so humid, maybe we had some lichen or algae formations growing in there. So I did some sort of random dispersal of the green into the lighter areas of the diorama. And then I went back with some light spritzing of the warm caramel to kind of create this layered effect. And the pictures don't capture it as well as I would like, but to the eye, they look very clear. You'll start to see some of those greens poke through that help it feel more natural and realistic. I just went back and forth with all of these paints, layering them to get the shading and effects that I needed, and toning them up and down to get the overall look that I ended up having. With all that cinder block that I carved, I painted that all, but I painted it in a very untraditional way. I did a bunch of random weathering on it, and then I went back and I intentionally painted with black wash all of the lines and then wiped them down so to look like they had been run down. Now close up, it looks kind of janky and it doesn't look very defined, but when you back out, it starts to look clear. And I did this on purpose because I knew it was going to be dark inside of the diorama, and those fine details were not necessarily going to be needed because there was going to be a platform and a back computer screen and desk hiding a lot of this brick. So I wanted the brick that was visible to pop. So I painted this so that there would be strong blacks and strong light grays and medium grays, so that once everything was covered with all of the different features, the lighting was brought in and it was dimmed down, it would pop through and you could see the sort of essence of the cinder block there without worrying about the detail. Here's the piece with the final shading gone. Just the way it popped just looked really, really beautiful to me. I was really, really happy with that. One of these steps that I was working in as I was doing all of the other things was making these hexagonally shaped tiles. One of the things that my commissioner and client wanted me to incorporate into the diorama was some sort of techno-futuristic looking stuff, but I figured if I went too techie, it would clash too much with the natural look. I came up with an idea of incorporating some futuristic looking styles and shape, but with natural formations. And so keeping in with the theme of the cave being carved out and molded out by the previous people who had built into it, and I individually cast out of plaster of Paris every single one of these tiles. I would come in early in the morning every day before work, and I would cast some tiles, let them dry, come back at the end of the day, pop those out of the mold, cast some new ones. And I did this every day for weeks until I got this huge batch of tiles, and then I went back and I glued them all down. And once everything was laid out where I wanted it with the stone and the tile, I mixed up a batch of, it's called Durham's Rock Hard Water Putty. And it's a lot like spackling paste in the way it behaves, but it can be mixed to different thicknesses. So it can be very, very thin like a liquid, it can be thick like a milkshake, or it can be very, very dense, very dense, like almost like a cement. I mix that up and I pour that over all the tiles and I spread it all out between and kind of become a grout for the tiles. Once that dried, I sanded it down. Some of the tile, it disappeared a little bit when I sanded it, and I thought, oh man, that's not what I was going for. But the more I looked at it and the more I painted it to incorporate it with the stone, it actually realized it actually looked better than I was intending. Having it a little bit less pronounced still evoked that feeling of that beautiful hexagonal shape, but it also made it look like this had been a place that had been worked in and lived in. The stone floor had been walked on and worn down over the years, so it actually ended up working out really, really well. That bat vehicle landing, the circular floor shape, it's made using all the same materials and techniques I've gone over for the other features, like the bat computer platform, the entrance to the Batcave for the bat vehicles. Same materials, same processes. If you're wondering how I did those little lights facing up at an angle, well, that's just PVC pipe that's about 1/2 inch thick. I cut it on a miter saw so that it was at a 45-degree angle, glued it to the base, and I drilled up through the bottom so I could place an LED in that. That's a very straightforward process. A lot of this is just cutting, gluing, shaping, having the patience and time to do it, and being driven to get to that point, because a lot of this takes a lot of patience and a lot of time. The last two main features I had to build out of non-insulation foam materials for this piece were the sort of triple platform I made suspended from the ceiling so that we had an entrance from the Wayne Manor and it would come down in a ladder and step formation to the bottom platform, and the bottom platform. So those were made using the same techniques and materials, layering different plastics and papers and metal meshes to get the final look. By the way, those big rivets will have pearl shapes that are stick-on that you can get in the scrapbooking aisle of your local craft store. And this is me with the diorama flipped on its back, just making sure as I place and measure how to drill through and secure through the foam, this other foam here, this platform, I've got my square down to make sure that everything is parallel and perpendicular properly to the orientation of the gravity in this piece. And I use some more of that same PVC pipe that I talked about on the platform for the vehicles as a strut to hold this piece to the ceiling where the rock was. That's also where I ran some of the wires up through for the lighting system that I had to do. This crazy looking piece here is actually the floor for the main bottom raised platform. I had to make a very detailed template of this and put it onto the foam board and cut it out and be very patient with myself as I did that. You see the green tape is where the seam, the center seam of the diorama where it opens up is, and I had to make sure that all stayed properly aligned as I made the template. In the next part of this series, I will go over how I got the lighting setup made, how I made some of the lighting shrouds, and all of the final fittings, details, and glue up so that you can understand how this giant Batcave came together. So that you don't miss out on that, please hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you'll know exactly when that video drops. Please batarang that like button all the way back to the Fortress of Solitude, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks so much for watching, and as always, if you use any of the techniques or ideas that I expressed or shared with you in this piece, please tag me on Instagram at oilers_workshop, or let me know in the comments below where I can find images of what you've worked on. Please, let's share, let's make each other's projects better, and I hope to see you in the next video.